somebody in this room could walk away with an extra $100 in your pocket today. Now, that means you could be getting lucky today, just not with me. Here's the thing I want you to ask though. If you had $100, if it was somewhere under your seat, and don't start looking right now, somebody may have dropped it. But what would you do with $100? And if you don't want to like quantify that, then I'm going to give you an example. That's like buying 5, not 4, but 5 Fortnite profile skins. That's right, mind blown. But in reality, what I want you to do is I want you to envision, be as creative as possible, because maybe for some of you, using that $100 might look like taking out your family, maybe even your distant family, and you haven't really spent time with them and you want to make some positive memories. Or maybe another person, it might mean that you have this really annoying leak that's just been dripping for months and you finally got some extra cash and you want to fix it. Or maybe for the other person, maybe you're like, I want to upgrade my love life. So I'm going to go from Tinder regular to Tinder premium because I got more swipe rights and swipe lefts. Let's be honest, they're all fun to do. But what is lurking? What is hiding behind all of these? The uniting element that brings all of your examples and my examples together is the reality that we know that once we get what we think we want, we're gonna want something more. That it doesn't give us the satisfaction that we think it's going to give us. Now, in the field of psychology, it's referred to as effective forecasting. And that's you and I, day in and day out, creating these imaginary scenarios where we think, once I get this, once I own that, once I meet her, Mr. Right or Mrs. Right now, they're going to change my life. They're going to alter my identity and they're going to change my whole narrative. And yet it doesn't always happen that way, does it? And so we live our lives in this perpetual Groundhog's Day, minus the fun of Bill Murray. And why? Why is it that we are constantly driven by using a faulty tool, a faulty mechanism that gives us a false sense of satisfaction, a false sense of purpose, and ultimately a false sense of freedom? I'm gonna tell you why in a second. But to solidify this a little bit more, how many of you are aware of, have seen, or maybe even have heard of the more famous Looney Tunes cartoon, Wile E, Coyote, and the Roadrunner? Raise your hands. You may even have the DVD collection. Do not raise your hands. You will lose street cred immediately. But as you might know, if you've ever even seen more than one episode, you'll know that within 5 seconds that the beginning begins the same and the ending ends the same. It's with Wile E, our kind of antagonist, who is using all of these faulty tools and mechanisms and strategies to get what he thinks he wants that will give him this false sense of happiness, right? But he never gets it. He never, ever gets it. However, what if Wile E. Coyote had effective forecasting on his side? What if he were able to project into the future and create a scenario where he actually got what he wanted? Would his life have been different? Well, we can all now be grateful to Family Guy because a few years back they created this what if scenario. And some of you may be aware of it and you can find it on YouTube. But it follows Wile E. Coyote directly after catching and killing and eating. Obviously, he was not vegan. The Roadrunner. And here he is. I'm gonna set the scenario here. He's sitting in this diner-esque scenario, and he's sitting in this chair, and he's bloated, and his neck is looking up at the ceiling, and he just goes on this massive diatribe of, I'm so glad I caught what I finally was waiting to catch, and I got what I wanted. Now, sitting in the center is the symbol of him getting what he thought he wanted. And on the other side is another coyote. Now, let's be honest. Whoever created the Looney Tunes did not have the ultimate baby book of names sitting next to them because you got Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner. Not brain science. But what happens in the middle of his bloated diatribe, looking up at the ceiling, having his symbol of getting what he thinks he wants, there's a moment of punctuated silence. And in that silence, his anonymous coyote friend leans in and says, now that you've got what you want, what are you going to do with the rest of your life? Now, that's a question we're always asking day in and day out, even if we're not thinking about it. But this sends poor Wile E into an existential crisis and sends him on a huge exploration of who he thinks he was, and then he converts to a religion, and that's where he finds his happiness. Now, if you haven't seen him yet, he might be knocking on your door, Elder Wile E. But why is it? What compels us so deeply to use a faulty mechanism like effective forecasting? Why do we commit to our own self-sabotage day in and day out? So let me give you a few examples that might hit home for you. So maybe for you, effective forecasting looks like this. Hey boss, I think I deserve a promotion. I have been working really hard, and I think I want to show that to my family. And I want more time with my family, and I want to just run with my kids. I want to spend time with them more, and I think this promotion will do that. And so after a few months go by, 3-6 months, you begin to realize something. That promotion didn't exactly give you what you wanted. In fact, it gave you the opposite. You wanted freedom, it gave you a prison. Maybe for another person, it might be like, hey, I've been waiting to get that car for the last 15 years. I've had kids along the way. Now I've got some extra money. And now I'm gonna sit here and ride and enjoy this new car. And you think your life is gonna be altered and it's gonna be changed. And everybody around you is gonna be like, that guy looks awesome. But in reality, nothing changes. And in fact, what you end up finding out is 6 months later down the road while you're changing a tire is, dang it, I bought a lemon. Or maybe others. You might have thought, you know what? Oh man, I cannot wait to meet the man or woman of my dreams. They're gonna change everything, and they might have. But you begin creating these false scenarios and you inject your emotional desire into that. It's gonna change who I am. It's gonna change everything. It's gonna make me happy, right? But then what happens maybe a year down the road? When you're sitting there across from each other on a table, and you begin to realize something. She's not who she said she was. Maybe I'm not who I thought I was. Now I notice that some spouses are getting nervous looks at each other. I just want to go on the record and say that's not my fault and good luck. But what is it that drives us to continuously commit to these narratives of limiting ourselves, our potential? What is it that keeps nagging at us to say, it's okay, use effective forecasting, create these what-if scenarios, keep truncating your own limitation and potential as a human being? Well, new research in the last few years has come out within the field of psychology that has actually discovered that the source of what guides this faulty behavior is trauma. It is our trauma. Your trauma. Everybody in this room has a form of trauma in one way, shape, or form. And it could have came from a childhood experience. It could have came from something that one of your teachers said when you were very young. Maybe it could have come from a boss. Maybe it could even have come from a spouse. But all of us have trauma. And the nature of trauma is that trauma begets trauma. Trauma does not beget your own liberation. It does not give you healing. It will actually justify its presence in your life so much so that it will give you the parameters of what you think it means to be human and happy and satisfied. So in one sense, you are using a tool that will give you and set up illusions of happiness but in reality will be keeping you from it. And there's another element to how trauma works, is that sometimes your trauma is not yours. It was given to you. Now, I'm a behavioral experimentalist, which means I have the fun of tinkering with social environments and working with communities to build out social scenarios that help us get to the root of why we do, what drives us to commit to our own limitations. I want you to meet Joe. Joe is this amazing senior citizen who we got to meet and actually spend time with him and learn about his trauma. But to understand Joe's trauma, you have to understand a little bit of his history. Because Joe's trauma was not his own, it was given to him. But it affected him in such a negative way. So his history includes his grandparents and parents being a part of the Italian diaspora in the 1880s, where there was a massive influx of Italian immigrants moving from Italy to certain regions within Canada. And so I got the opportunity to be a part of this project. It was an amazing time. It was an amazing experience. And during my time during this project, we got to meet Joe. We got to spend time with him, hear about his trauma. And the thing was because there was so much anti-immigrant sentiment, not very unlike what we're dealing with today, Joe took on the narratives of his grandparents and parents to the point that his parents would never let him leave the house. And so by the time we met Joe, he was already in his late 70s. He had lived his life as an agoraphobic. For those of you who may not be aware of what that is, that's simply stated that it's someone who is so afraid of the possibilities of being hurt or in danger of the outside world that they will literally lock themselves in their house. So Joe's trauma was not his own, but he took it on as his own. And he began owning the limitations of someone else's story, and it embedded with who he was. Now that is the very nature and drive of trauma. It will tie itself to who you think you are, and it will limit every essence of any of your potential that you want to align with. It is really like the ultimate FOMO, the fear of missing out, because it makes you think, as long as I have this thing, as long as I get this person, my life will make sense and I will be fully satisfied. And so we will continuously use this tool, which isn't really there to help us at all, because we never deal or respond with our trauma. I want to tell you one more story. There's a young boy, and he lived on the streets. No, he wasn't Oliver Twist. He lived there with his family. And they would oscillate between living on the street and in temporary housing. Just so you get it, living on the streets, temporary housing. His life continuously got worse, to the point that their life was so unstable that his parents decided to use drugs, but not just use them, sell them. And also try to encourage the kids, be like me, and use them with the kids. Now, in the age of not having eBay, they didn't really get as much commission on their sales, and so it wasn't very stable income. And you would have thought it would have stopped there, but his trauma continued, because then his mother moved to the streets and became a prostitute. My mother moved to the streets and became a prostitute. That story of the young boy is my story. Now, each and every one of us has a story. We all have trauma that we're dealing with. We all have trauma that we're responding to. And I want to tell you, there is a way out. And you need to hear that. You need to embrace that. Because by the end of this year, according to the World Health Organization, someone will give their life up every 20 seconds. By the end of my talk, that's around 75 people who will commit suicide. Because we have encouraged a culture of silence. We have almost made it normal to never talk about our trauma. So I'm here to say, talk about your trauma, because this is about your liberation, your emancipation into who you're meant to be. And if you do, if you decide to face your trauma head on, do not back down. Because lying on the other side of that first step is freedom, who has been standing there all along, who has been shouting in punctuated whispers, I am here, I am now, I am real. Come and embrace me. Thank you.